In this Writer's Toolbox video, I will explain and define what context is, I'll discuss contextualizing evidence, and how to select the best evidence for your claim. So as I've mentioned in other videos, really great readers of literature are able to hold up a mirror to the text that they are reading and see how that text reflects the society around them. Now, in the case of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, as we'll discuss in this video, great readers of literature will see how racial inequality in America in the 1930s and 60s is reflected in this book. But before we do that, we need to understand what context is. Now, if I ask you, is it okay for person X to punch person Y? Presumably you'd say no, as violence is wrong. But what if I said that person X and person Y were professional boxers in a boxing match? Well, then it'd be okay. Now, this is context. It's the backstory we need to understand the bigger picture. In another example, the boy stole the girl's heart. That sounds quite sweet, doesn't it? Very romantic. But it could also be quite sinister, like this picture says. Now, context would tell us which one of these pictures reflects the sentence. For instance, did it happen at night or in the day? Where was it? Outside, in a park, at night, at a picnic, at the cinema, in a hospital? Did the girl know the boy? Did she scream? Were the police called? This backstory or context tells us more. Now, context is essentially a big picture. It's the background, the foreground. It's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And we need to know all of these things before we read a text. But more than that, when we explain a text, we need to make sure the audience of our writing or our speech knows these answers as well. So always imagine the reader knows less than you. Write or speak as if they have not read the novel or studied its history. Let's look at an example where a person hasn't given enough context. Now, they were asked the question, what is the author's central message in the novel? Their answer, the author's central message in the novel is that racism is bad. This is evident in the lines, you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, that white man is trash. There's nothing more sickening than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of an African American. It's all adding up, and one of these days we're going to pay. I hope it's not in you children's time. Did you understand that? Because I don't. There's not enough context there. Now, the book they were talking about is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This story centers around Scout Finch. She's a 6-year-old girl, and the story is written from her perspective, and she's the daughter of Atticus Finch. He is a lawyer defending an innocent African American. The setting of the story is 1930s Alabama. Now, this is important because during the 1930s there were a set of laws called Jim Crow laws which separated and segregated African Americans from white people. You might know about African Americans having to sit at the back of the bus, use different water fountains, and go to different schools. Alabama was a state that was at the time very, very racist. Now, the plot of this story is that through the eyes of 6-year-old Scout, the novel centers on Atticus Finch's attempts to prove the innocence of Tom Robinson. Now, Tom Robinson was a black man who was wrongly accused of raping a white woman in 1930s Alabama. The author's life is also important context for us. Now, Harper Lee is from Alabama herself, so she likely saw racism as she lived through the Jim Crow laws. But the book was also written in 1960, and this was during the American Civil Rights Movement, where people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X stood up for African American rights and sought justice and fairness. Now, the excerpt the student was given was this. Atticus says to Scout, as you grow older, you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. But let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, no matter who he is, how rich he is, or how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash. Atticus was speaking so quietly, his last word crashed on our ears. I looked up and his face was vehement. There's nothing more sickening to me than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of an African American's ignorance. Don't fool yourselves. It's all adding up, and one of these days we're going to pay the bill for it. I hope it's not in your children's time. Now the question the student was asked was, what is the author's central message in the novel? Well, I'm looking at this and I can see, there's a very clear message. You'll see where white men treat black men every day of your life. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, that white man is trash. Now I can infer that one of the big themes of the story is racism, and that the author is trying to present a message that racial inequality is a bad thing and that African Americans deserve justice and equality. It's quite clear in this quote, I think. Also, these words crashed on Scout's ears and the reader's ears, showing the importance of this message. There's nothing more sickening to me than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of an African American. Again, very clear. And it's all adding up. One of these days we're going to pay, and I hope it's not in you children's time. A warning at the end that we need to change our attitudes towards African Americans. So there you have it. They're the quotes I'm going to need to answer the question. And the answer I have is that African Americans face unfair injustice and that we need to do more to end inequality and treat all humans equally and justly. That's the message I take away from the author. Now, what context do I need to explain to my readers so that they would understand these quotes? Remember, I have to imagine that they haven't read the book. So they'd probably need to know that despite evidence proving his innocence, Atticus Finch loses the case in which he defends African American Tom Robinson. Tom Robinson was a man wrongly accused of raping a woman. He didn't do it. Atticus presents evidence to suggest that he didn't do it. And Tom Robinson is still found guilty, highlighting the racial injustice at the time. In chapter 23, 6-year-old Scout asks her father how a system can be so unjust. Because the novel is set in the 1930s, with Jim Crow laws, Atticus tries to teach his daughter of the evilness of racism, and he encourages her to be better and rise above it. He also presents a warning to her. And the novel was written in the 1960s, in 1960 during the Civil Rights Movement. So when Atticus says, I hope it's not in you children's time, this would literally be Scout's time as an adult, and when she has children herself. Now I picked my evidence, and I've got my context, okay? I have a clear topic sentence that explains the what, as you can see in black, and the why or the how in purple. In her novel To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee tries to present the injustices and inequality African Americans face and call for change through Atticus's speeches and moral lessons to his children. Nice clear claim there. Then I introduce my evidence with context written in blue. Context explains to people who haven't read the book what's going on, what the quotes mean. So in chapter 23, after Scout's father and lawyer Atticus Finch loses the court case and Tom Robinson is found guilty despite evidence to the contrary, Atticus must explain to Scout, his 6-year-old daughter, about such injustices. He tells her that you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, the white man is trash. There's nothing more sickening than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of an African American person. It's all adding up. One of these days we're going to pay. I hope it's not in you children's time. And these words crashed on her ears. That's quite long. That's a long quote. I'd argue that's definitely too long. Now, one thing I want you to think about this year is this phrase. Say a lot about a little. Say a lot about a little. Say a lot about a little. Now, the a lot will be your analysis, which will be talked about in other videos, but the little is your evidence. Now, we can see through the colour scheme here, the blue is context and the red is the author's words. We only need to pick the relevant words and phrases. We don't need these long sentences. Remember, when you're writing about literature, we're reading as your audience, we're reading your inference and your interpretation of a text. Your words are important. So no one wants to read an essay where 50% of the essay is quotes from the book. We want to know what you think about it and your analysis of it. So let's start picking what pieces we need from this quote. Well, white men cheat black men every day, and whenever a white man does that, that white man is trash. I think that is a clear message, so I think it's important we use that. We're going to pay. Hope it's not in you children's time. I feel like the warning is also really important here. And the last word, crashed on Scout's ears. I think that's important because the word crashed shows just how important and profound these words were to her and also the reader themselves. So these are the quotes I'm going to use. So I have my topic sentence, my claim with the what and the how or the why, and I have my context. In chapter 23, Scout's father loses the court case and Tom Robinson is found guilty despite evidence to the contrary. Atticus must explain to Scout, his 6-year-old daughter, about such injustices. Well, here's the first quote I need. Atticus informs her that white men cheat black men, and that whenever a white man does that to a black man, that white man is trash. His final warning to Scout crashed on her ears as he tells her that the rest of us are going to pay and that I hope it's not in you children's time. And then I have cited that as well. I have the MLA citation, the author's surname and the page number. And then we have it. We have the beginning of a paragraph which has a clear claim and has really good, succinct evidence to support that, which is explained through context. So people who haven't even read To Kill a Mockingbird understand the author's words I've quoted. Let's look at another excerpt, one more example. The question is, how does Scout's description of the Radley Place characterise her? So the Radley Place jutted into sharp curve beyond our house. Walking south, one faced its porch. The sidewalk turned and ran beside the lot. The house was low, was once a white top with a deep front porch and green shutters, but had long ago darkened to the colour of the slate grey yard around it. Rain-rotted shingles drooped over the eaves of the veranda. Oak trees kept the sun away. The remains of a picket drunkenly guarded the front yard, a swept yard that was never swept, where Johnson grass and rabbit tobacco grew in abundance. A picket, by the way, is a fence, so it's a picket fence that's drunkenly guarded, showing it's falling down. Inside the house lived a malevolent phantom, or a ghost. People said he existed, but Gemini had never seen him. People said he went out at night when the moon was down and peeped in windows. When people's azaleas froze in a cold snap, their flowers, it was because he had breathed on them. Any stealthy small crimes committed in Macomb, Alabama, were his work. Once the town was terrorized by a series of morbid nocturnal events. People's chickens and household pets were found mutilated. Although the culprit was Crazy Addie, who eventually drowned himself in Barker's Eddy, people still looked at the Radley Place, unwilling to discard their initial suspicions. There's the excerpt. I've got the question. Time to pick the evidence. Well, the Radley Place had long ago darkened to the colour of the slate grey yard around it. Oak trees kept the sun away. The remains of a picket drunkenly guarded the front swept yard that was never swept. Inside the house lived a malevolent phantom, but I had never seen him. When people's azaleas froze in a cold snap, it was because he had breathed on them. These are the quotes I'm going to take. I feel like they answer the question quite well. It characterises Scout, the 6-year-old girl, because she sees this house as like a scary, ghostly place, like a haunted house almost, where trees kept the sun away, and the yard that was never swept always seemed swept. She's also talking about a phantom who she's never seen, with scary and obviously untrue rumours that she's heard. Now, this is the context I need. Scout is a 6-year-old girl. She lives in a town called Macomb in Alabama. In the house next door, known as the Radley Place, there lives a mysterious man whom she has never seen. There are sinister rumours and tales about this man which Scout believes. She describes the house in chapter 1 using lots of eerie and scary imagery. So through the description of the Radley Place and the mysterious man who lives there, Scout Finch is characterised as immature and naive. That's my topic sentence with the what and the how, the how and the why plus the what. And then I've got the quotes I need. So here's what it looked like when I finished. Scout, the 6-year-old protagonist, lives in Macomb, Alabama. She describes the house next door as being long ago darkened to the colour of the slate grey yard around it, due to the oak trees keeping the sun away. She also details how the house was run down but still appeared as if it was cared for and maintained, as the remains of a picket drunkenly guarded the front swept yard that was never swept. Added to the mystery of the house itself, she describes the inhabitant as a malevolent fountain whom Scout had never seen, and explained a town rumour that when people's azaleas froze in a cold snap, it was because he had breathed on them, which she believes. And then the citation. You can see here that I've only picked the sentences, the phrases, the words that I've needed, and I've given enough context. Now, if you've never read To Kill a Mockingbird, you already know Scout 6, she lives in this town. The house next door is creepy and there's a man who lives there who she's never seen, and there's these weird rumours about him, almost like a ghost or something, or a monster. And this characterises her as naive. You can see the importance of context now. People who have never read this will fully understand my work. So here's a checklist when you come to write your own. Have you given enough context and described what is happening in enough detail that someone who has never read the novel would still understand your writing? Have you only selected what you need, combining necessary words or phrases to create a picture that can be used as evidence for your claim? And does everything make sense? If you remove the quotation marks and change it all to one colour, is it still grammatically correct? Now, there's another video I'll make about evidence, particularly embedding evidence, so please watch that to get a step-by-step guide on how to do this. But I hope this detail has provided enough information about context, contextualizing evidence, and selecting your evidence. Thank you for watching.